The rain fell in sheets that October night, turning the cobblestone streets into mirrors that reflected the amber glow of street lights. In the heart of the city's forgotten district, where legitimate businesses closed their doors after sunset and only certain establishments remained open, a small figure ran through the darkness. She was 6 years old, maybe 7. Her name was Sophia, though few people knew it. Her dress, once white with small blue flowers, was now torn at the hem and stained with mud. Her black hair clung to her face, soaked through, and her small feet splashed through puddles as she ran with the desperation of someone fleeing death itself. Sophia had been told never to go near the old Caruso social club. Her mother, Elena, had warned her 100 times. "That place is not for us," she would say, her voice tight with a fear Sophia could feel but not understand. "Those men are dangerous. Promise me you'll never go there." But tonight, the rules meant nothing. Tonight, her mother's screams had shattered every promise. The 3 men had arrived at their apartment just after dark. Sophia had been drawing at the kitchen table when she heard the pounding on the door. Her mother's face had gone white, drained of all color in an instant. "Hide!" Elena had whispered urgently, pushing Sophia toward the bedroom. "Under the bed! Don't come out no matter what you hear." Sophia had crawled beneath the bed frame, her small body trembling, her hands pressed over her ears. But she could still hear everything, the door splintering open, her mother's voice, trying to sound calm, trying to reason. Then the men's laughter, cruel and cold. "Salvatore sends his regards," one of them had said. "You're 3 months behind, Elena. The abutre doesn't like waiting." "I'll get the money," her mother had pleaded. "Just give me 2 more weeks. Please. We're done with extensions." The sound that followed, her mother's cry of pain, had broken something inside Sophia. She had scrambled out from under the bed and run to the living room, where she saw her mother on the floor, blood trickling from her lip, one of the men standing over her with his hand raised for another blow. Sophia had screamed. The men had turned to her, their faces showing neither remorse nor mercy, just annoyance. "Get the kid out of here," one of them had muttered, but Sophia had already run. Out the door, down 4 flights of stairs, into the street. She ran past the closed shops and the few people who looked away, unwilling to involve themselves in someone else's nightmare. She ran toward the only place she knew, where men with power gathered, the place her mother had forbidden her to go, the Caruso Social Club. The building stood at the corner of Mulberry and Hester, a 3-story structure of dark brick with heavy curtains drawn across every window. Outside, parked along the curb, sat 3 black cars that gleamed even in the rain. 2 men stood beneath the green awning that extended over the entrance, both wearing dark suits despite the late hour. They were smoking, talking in low voices, shoulders hunched against the cold. These were soldiers, the lowest rank in the hierarchy, but still dangerous men. Men who had proven themselves, men who carried guns and knew how to use them. Sophia ran straight toward them, her small legs pumping, her breath coming in gasps. She didn't slow down even when they noticed her, even when their conversation stopped and their hands moved instinctively toward their waistbands. "Hey!" one of them barked. "Kid, what the hell?" Sophia crashed into the first man's legs, her small hands gripping his pants as she looked up at him with tear-streaked cheeks. "Please!" she sobbed. "Please! They're hurting my mama! Please help her!" The 2 soldiers exchanged glances. The taller one, a man named Marco with a scar across his chin, knelt down to Sophia's level. His face was hard, weathered by years of violence, but his voice when he spoke was not unkind. "Where's your mama, kid?" "The apartments," Sophia gasped between sobs. "On Morton Street, Building 12, they're hitting her. They said something about the abutre. Please, please help her." The shorter soldier, Tommy 2 Fingers Messina, went very still. "The abutre? Salvatore's men?" Marco's expression darkened. He stood up, his hand still resting gently on Sophia's shoulder. "Tommy, get the capo. Now!" Tommy disappeared inside the club without another word. Marco guided Sophia under the awning, out of the rain. He pulled out a handkerchief and wiped her face with surprising gentleness. "What's your name, little one?" "Sophia." "Sophia what?" Sophia Russo. Marco's face went pale. He knew that last name. Every man who had been with the family for more than 5 years knew that name. Elena Russo, the woman who had disappeared from Vincent Caruso's life 7 years ago, vanishing overnight without explanation, leaving only a brief note that said she could not be part of this world. The Don had never spoken of her again, but those who had been close to him knew. They had seen the change in him after she left, the coldness that settled over him like frost, the way he worked longer hours, took more risks, eliminated rivals with increasing efficiency and decreasing mercy, the way he forbade anyone from mentioning her name in his presence. And now her daughter was standing here, soaked to the bone, begging for help. The door of the club opened. First came Tommy, then a man in his 40s with iron-gray hair slicked back and a face that looked like it had been carved from stone. This was Carlo Benedetti, a capo who ran 3 crews and answered only to the underboss and the Don himself. He was a man who had killed his first rival at 16 and had never looked back. Carlo took one look at Sophia and his jaw tightened. "Whose kid?" "Elena Russo's," Marco said quietly. Carlo's eyes widened fractionally, the only sign of shock he would permit himself. He crouched down in front of Sophia, his massive frame somehow making itself smaller, less threatening. "Your mama, Piccola. What's her name?" "Elena," Sophia whispered. "Elena Russo. They're hurting her. They said the Abutre sent them." Carlo stood up slowly. His face had gone hard as granite. "Where is he?" "Upstairs," Tommy said. "Meeting with the consigliere and the underboss." "Get him," Carlo said flatly. "Now." The word him needed no clarification. There was only one him in this building. Only one man whose presence commanded such immediate obedience. Vincent Caruso, the Don the Phantom. Tommy hesitated for only a heartbeat. Interrupting the Don's private meetings was not done lightly, but the look in Carlo's eyes brooked no argument. He disappeared inside again. Marco kept his hand on Sophia's shoulder, a silent promise that she was safe now. The child had stopped crying, though she still trembled, her small body shaking with cold and fear and exhaustion. Inside the club, beyond the heavy oak doors, was a world Sophia could not imagine. The main floor was dim, lit by brass fixtures that cast amber pools of light across dark wood floors and leather booths. A bar ran along one wall, bottles gleaming like jewels. Small tables were scattered throughout, most empty at this hour, though a few old men sat playing cards in the far corner, their voices low. But the real business happened upstairs, in the private rooms where the family's leaders discussed territories and tributes, where alliances were formed and betrayals were punished, where the future of entire neighborhoods was decided over glasses of aged whiskey. In a second-floor office paneled in mahogany, 3 men sat around a polished table. Smoke hung in the air from their cigars. Papers were spread before them, maps, ledgers, lists of names. The consigliere, Giancarlo "Johnny Books" Romano, was a thin man in his 60s with wire-rimmed glasses and the quiet intensity of someone who had survived decades in this life by being smarter than everyone else. He advised, he counseled, he remembered every slight and every favor. The Don trusted his judgment above all others. The underboss, Frankie the Bull Castellano, was Johnny's opposite. Broad-shouldered, thick-necked, with hands that could crush bone. He was the Don's right hand, the enforcer of policies, the man who commanded the capos and their crews. Frankie was loyal to his core, but ambitious enough to understand power when he saw it. He would never betray Vincent, but he watched, he learned, he prepared for a future he hoped would never come. And then there was the Don himself. Vincent Caruso sat at the head of the table, a man in his early 40s who looked like he had been born wearing a suit. His hair was dark and graying at the temples, combed back in the old style. His face was lean, almost ascetic, with sharp cheekbones and dark eyes that seemed to see through walls. He wore a charcoal suit with a black tie, a gold watch on his wrist, the only jewelry he permitted himself. He spoke rarely. When he did, people listened. His voice was soft, almost gentle, which made his words all the more dangerous. Men who had heard Vincent Caruso say, "I'm disappointed in you," knew they might not see another sunrise. They called him the Phantom because he moved through the city like smoke, appearing where he was needed, vanishing before the law could find him. He had taken control of the family 15 years ago after his father's death, and in that time he had doubled their territory and tripled their profits. He was fair, he was ruthless, he was inevitable, and he did not tolerate interruption. So when Tommy burst through the door, pale and breathing hard, all three men looked up with expressions ranging from annoyance to anger. "This better be," Frankie started. "There's a child downstairs," Tommy said, his words tumbling over each other. "A little girl. She ran to our men crying that someone's hurting her mother, Salvatore's men. And boss," he swallowed hard, "boss, her mother's name is Elena Russo." The temperature in the room dropped 20 degrees. Johnny Books went very still, his cigar frozen halfway to his lips. Frankie's eyes widened, and he looked immediately at Vincent, trying to gauge his reaction. Vincent's face showed nothing. For a long moment, he did not move, did not speak. He might have been carved from ice. Then, very slowly, he stood up. He straightened his cufflinks with deliberate precision. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried the weight of a death sentence. "Where?" "Downstairs, boss." "With Carlo and Marco." Vincent walked past Tommy without another word, his footsteps silent on the carpet. Frankie and Johnny exchanged glances before following. They descended the stairs in silence. The card players in the corner looked up, saw the Don's face, and immediately looked down again. Some things you did not witness. Vincent pushed through the front doors and stepped out into the rain. He did not seem to notice the cold or the water that immediately began to darken his suit. His eyes were fixed on the small figure standing between Marco and Carlo. Sophia looked up at the sound of the door opening. She saw a tall man with dark eyes, a man who looked at her with an expression she could not read. But she felt something shift in the air around him, something that made even the soldiers stand a little straighter. Vincent walked forward until he stood directly in front of her. Then, to the shock of every man present, he knelt down in the rain, bringing himself to her level. Water streamed down his face, but he ignored it completely. "Your name is Sophia?" he asked softly. She nodded, her voice small. "Yes, sir." "And your mama is Elena?" "Yes, sir." "Please, they're hurting her. Please help." Vincent studied her face for a long moment. She had Elena's eyes, the same dark brown, the same shape. And suddenly, he was somewhere else. Someone else. Remembering a woman who had loved him and left him, who had carved out a piece of his heart and taken it with her. He reached out and gently brushed a strand of wet hair from Sophia's face. When he spoke, his voice was still soft, but beneath it ran currents of something old and deep and very, very dangerous. "Where is she?" "Morton Street, Building 12, 4th floor, apartment 4D. Vincent stood. The rain continued to fall, but he seemed to grow taller, darker, more solid. He turned to Carlo, and his voice changed. No longer gentle, now hard as iron. "Take 12 men. Everyone goes armed. Morton Street, Building 12, 4th floor, apartment 4D. Salvatore's collectors are there. Bring them to me alive. All 3 of them. I don't care what condition they're in, but they breathe when you bring them. Understood?" "Yes, boss." "And Carlo?" Vincent's eyes were black in the streetlight. "If Elena Russo has so much as another bruise on her, if one hair on her head has been harmed beyond what's already been done, you burn that building to the ground with Salvatore's men inside it. Then you go find Salvatore and you drag him to me in chains." Carlo smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. "It'll be my pleasure, boss. Go. Now." Carlo turned and snapped his fingers. Men began emerging from the club. Soldiers, hardened men with cold eyes and efficient movements. They checked their weapons with practiced ease. 3 cars roared to life. Within 2 minutes, they were gone, taillights disappearing into the rain. Vincent looked down at Sophia again. She was shivering violently now, her small body succumbing to shock and cold. Without hesitation, Vincent removed his suit jacket and wrapped it around her shoulders. It engulfed her like a blanket. "Frankie," he said quietly, "take Sophia inside. Get her warm, food, hot chocolate, whatever she needs. Stay with her." Frankie nodded and gently scooped Sophia into his arms. She didn't resist. She was too tired, too scared, too overwhelmed. As Frankie carried her inside, she looked back at Vincent over his shoulder. The Don stood in the rain, watching the street where Carlo's cars had disappeared. He looked like a statue, like something ancient and patient and utterly implacable. Johnny Books came to stand beside him, an umbrella appearing in his hand, seemingly from nowhere. He held it over both of them. "You know what this means," Johnny said quietly. "Yes, Salvatore won't take this lying down. This is his territory, his collectors. If you—" "I don't care," Vincent said, and his voice was colder than the rain. 7 years ago, Elena Russo left me because she was afraid this life would destroy her. She wanted safety. She wanted peace. She wanted to raise a child away from all of this. He turned to look at Johnny, and the consigliere saw something in the Don's eyes that made him take a half-step back. And now Salvatore's men are in her home, beating her in front of her daughter, terrorizing a woman who wanted nothing more than to be left alone. They made this my business, Johnny. They brought her back into my world, and now they're going to learn why she was afraid in the first place." Johnny said nothing. There was nothing to say. He had known Vincent Caruso for 30 years. He had seen him angry before, had seen him order men's deaths, had watched him make decisions that turned the city's underworld inside out. But he had never seen this quiet, terrible certainty, this sense that something had been decided, that the wheels of fate had begun to turn, and nothing could stop them now. "What are you going to do?" Johnny asked. Vincent turned back to the street, to the rain, to the darkness, where his men were racing toward Elena Russo's apartment. "What I should have done 7 years ago," he said softly. "I'm going to protect what's mine." And in that moment, Johnny Books understood. This was not about territory or respect or even revenge. This was about the one thing Vincent Caruso had never been able to protect before. The one person who had walked away because she was afraid of the monster he might become. Tonight, Elena Russo would learn the truth. The monster had always been there, but it had always been hers. And God help anyone who tried to hurt what belonged to Vincent Caruso. The rain continued to fall on the empty street. Inside the club, Sophia sat wrapped in the Don's jacket, sipping hot chocolate with trembling hands, guarded by the underboss of the most powerful crime family in the city. And across town, 12 men armed with guns and fury pulled up outside Building 12 on Morton Street, where 3 collectors who had made a terrible mistake were about to learn that some debts are paid in blood. The night had only just begun. Morton Street was the kind of place where people learned not to ask questions. The buildings were old, their facades crumbling, windows covered with bars or boards. Streetlights flickered when they worked at all. The residents who lived here were the ones the city forgot. Immigrants working 3 jobs, single mothers barely making rent, old people whose pensions had evaporated decades ago. It was also Salvatore Grimaldi's territory, the abutre, they called him, the vulture. He ran loan sharking operations, numbers games, protection rackets. His collectors came around like clockwork, and everyone paid. Those who didn't learned quickly, broken fingers, burned shops, disappeared family members. Building 12 was particularly run down, even by Morton Street standards. The front door hung crooked on its hinges. The lobby smelled of mildew and old garbage. The elevator had not worked in 6 years. Carlo Benedetti and his 12 men arrived in 3 cars, parking with the precision of a military operation. They did not rush. Rushing was for amateurs. They moved with the calm efficiency of men who had done this 100 times before. Carlo stepped out of the lead car and looked up at the building. Rain streamed down his face. He wore no expression at all. "Marco, Tommy, you're with me. Vito, take 4 men and cover the back exit. Nobody leaves. Angelo, you and the rest stay here. Anyone comes out that front door who isn't us, you stop them. No noise unless necessary. We clear?" A chorus of quiet acknowledgments answered him. "And remember what the Don said. The 3 collectors come back alive. Everyone else, I don't care." Carlo entered the building with Marco and Tommy behind him. The lobby was empty except for an old woman sitting in a broken chair, her eyes closed, possibly asleep, possibly dead. She did not stir as they passed. They took the stairs quickly, their footsteps silent despite their size. These were men who knew how to move. 4th floor, apartment 4D. Carlo could hear sounds even before they reached the hallway. A woman's muffled crying, men's voices, laughter. He paused at the corner, listening. 3 voices, definitely. One was complaining about having to work in the rain. Another was discussing whether to take the television as collateral. The third was quieter, meaner. Stop crying, Elena. You think tears pay debts? Salvatore gave you 3 months. 3 months. You think he's running a charity? I told you, Elena's voice, thick with pain and fear. I'll have the money next week. My paycheck? Your paycheck ain't worth the paper it's printed on. You owe $6,000. Your paycheck is what, $400 a week? You do the math. Please. My daughter. Your daughter ran off. Smart kid. Probably calling the cops right now, but they don't come to Morton Street. You know that. Nobody comes to Morton Street. Carlo felt something cold settle in his chest. He looked at Marco and Tommy and gave 2 quick hand signals. Marco moved to the left side of the door, Tommy to the right. Carlo stood directly in front of it. Then he kicked the door with enough force to tear it off its hinges. The apartment was small and shabby. Peeling wallpaper, furniture that looked like it had been salvaged from the street. But it was clean. Someone had tried to make it a home. Elena Russo sat on a threadbare couch, her face bruised, her lips split, her left eye swelling shut. She wore a faded dress and her dark hair hung around her face. Even beaten, even terrified, Carlo could see why the Don had loved her. There was something in her face, a dignity that violence could not erase. The 3 collectors stood around her like vultures indeed. The first was a massive man, easily 6'4", with a shaved head and tattoos crawling up his neck. This was Paulie Hambone DeLuca, Salvatore's primary enforcer for this district. The second was younger, maybe 30, with slicked back hair and a cheap suit. Rocco Minetti, a climber, someone trying to make his bones. The third was the one who had been speaking, smaller than the others but with eyes like dead fish. Gino, the Weasel, Vaccaro. He was holding a baseball bat. All 3 turned when the door exploded inward. All 3 reached for their weapons. They were not fast enough. Marco had his gun out and pressed against Hambone's temple before the big man's hand touched his waistband. Tommy had Rocco slammed face first against the wall, his arm twisted behind his back at an angle that promised a broken shoulder. And Carlo walked straight to Gino, pulled the bat from his hands as casually as taking candy from a child, and pressed his own gun under the weasel's chin. "Don't," Carlo said softly. Gino froze. His eyes went wide with recognition and fear. Everyone in the underworld knew Carlo Benedetti, knew his reputation, knew what it meant when he showed up. "On the floor," Carlo commanded. "All 3 of you, hands behind your heads." They obeyed instantly. Marco and Tommy kept their guns trained while Carlo walked over to Elena. She looked up at him with an expression of confusion and disbelief. "Are you—" she started, her voice hoarse. "Carlo Benedetti, ma'am. Vincent sent me." The color drained from her face. If she had been pale before, now she looked like a ghost. "Vincent? How did he—" "Your daughter came to the club. She asked for help." Elena's hands flew to her mouth. "Sophia? Oh, God, Sophia. Where is she? Is she safe?" "She's with the Don right now, being taken care of. Fed, warmed up. She's not hurt." Carlo's voice was surprisingly gentle. "But you are. Let me see." He examined her face with the clinical detachment of someone who had seen violence his entire life. Split lip, bruised cheek, black eye forming. Possibly a cracked rib from the way she was holding her side. Painful, but nothing life-threatening. "Tommy, call for a car. We're taking Mrs. Russo back to the club. Marco, get some towels, clean her up a bit." "What about these 3? Marco asked, jerking his head toward the collectors on the floor. Carlo looked down at them. His face was expressionless. "Tie them up. We're taking them too. The Don wants to see them." Gino made a sound that might have been a whimper. Hambone, to his credit, tried to maintain some defiance. "You know who we work for? Salvatore will—" Carlo moved faster than a man his size should be able to. He grabbed Hambone by the throat and lifted him partially off the ground, his fingers digging into the big man's windpipe. When Carlo spoke, his voice was still soft, still calm, but underneath it ran a current of violence that promised terrible things. Salvatore Grimaldi is a cockroach who runs protection rackets in the poorest neighborhoods of this city. He preys on people who can't fight back. He beats women in front of their children. And tonight, he made the mistake of touching someone who belongs to Vincent Caruso. Do you understand what that means?" Hambone's face was turning purple. He clawed at Carlo's hand uselessly. "It means Salvatore is already dead. He just doesn't know it yet. And you three?" Carlo released Hambone, who collapsed to the floor, gasping. "You're going to help Vincent deliver the message." Marco and Tommy worked quickly, using zip ties to bind the collector's hands behind their backs and their ankles together. They were not gentle about it. Rocco started to cry quietly. Gino stared at the floor, his face ashen. Hambone breathed heavily, one hand massaging his throat but said nothing more. Carlo helped Elena to her feet. She winced but managed to stand. "I need to get some things," she said. "Clothes for Sophia, some of her toys. Make it quick." Elena moved to the bedroom, and Carlo heard drawers opening, items being gathered. She returned a few minutes later with a small suitcase and a stuffed rabbit that looked very old and very loved. "That's everything," she said quietly. "There's no coming back here," Carlo told her. "You understand that, right? After tonight, Salvatore will know. This apartment isn't safe anymore." Elena looked around at the small space that had been her home for 7 years. The place where she had raised her daughter away from the violence, away from the family, away from Vincent. She had worked 2 jobs, sometimes 3. She had scraped by. She had kept Sophia fed and clothed and safe. And in one night, it had all come crashing down. "I understand," she said. They went downstairs. Vito and his men had brought the cars around to the front. The 3 collectors were loaded roughly into the trunk of one vehicle. It was a tight fit, but Carlo did not care about their comfort. Elena rode in the back seat of Carlo's car, staring out the window at the rain-slicked streets, saying nothing. The drive back to the club took 20 minutes. When they arrived, Vincent was standing exactly where Carlo had left him, still in the rain, now without his jacket. He looked like a statue erected to some dark and ancient god. Carlo opened the door and helped Elena out. She stood there on the sidewalk, the rain immediately soaking through her thin dress, and looked at Vincent. 7 years. 7 years since she had seen his face. 7 years since she had written him that note and disappeared before dawn. 7 years of wondering if she had made the right choice, of telling herself she had saved Sophia from this life, of lying awake at night, remembering the way he touched her face, the way he said her name. And here he was, exactly as she remembered, and completely changed. Still handsome, still dangerous, but harder now, colder. The warmth she had once seen in his eyes when he looked at her was gone, replaced by something she could not read. Vincent walked toward her slowly. He stopped 3 feet away, his eyes moving over her face, taking in every bruise, every mark. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Elena," he said, and his voice was soft, so soft she had to strain to hear it over the rain. "Vincent." Her voice broke on his name. They stood there, 2 people separated by 3 feet and 7 years, and an ocean of words that had never been spoken. Around them, the soldiers watched in silence, witnesses to something that felt almost sacred. Finally, Vincent spoke again. "Where is Sophia?" "Inside, with Frankie. She's been asking for you." Elena's eyes filled with tears, though whether from relief or fear or something else entirely, even she could not have said. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for sending Carlo. Thank you for—" "Don't," Vincent said, and there was an edge to his voice now, a crack in the ice. "Don't thank me. Not yet." He turned to Carlo. "The collectors?" "In the trunk. All 3. Not a mark on them. Just like you wanted." Vincent nodded slowly. "Take them to the warehouse on Pier 17. Chain them to the support beams. I'll deal with them later. And Salvatore? Leave him for now. He'll hear about tonight soon enough. When he does, he'll do something stupid. Men like him always do. And when he does, we'll be ready." Carlo gestured to his men, who began transferring the bound collectors from one car to another. There were muffled sounds of protest from inside the trunk, quickly silenced by a sharp rap on the metal. Vincent finally looked back at Elena. "You need to see a doctor." "I'm fine. It's just bruises." "Johnny!" Vincent called, not looking away from Elena. The consigliere appeared from the shadows like a ghost. Call Dr. Moretti. Tell him we need him at my house within the hour, and have Maria prepare the guest rooms. 2 of them. Right away, boss. Vincent held out his hand to Elena. She looked at it for a long moment, and he saw the war being fought behind her eyes. Taking his hand meant stepping back into his world, into the violence and danger she had fled. Not taking it meant facing Salvatore's revenge alone, unprotected, watching her daughter grow up in fear. It was not really a choice at all. She placed her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers, warm despite the cold rain, and something in her chest loosened, a knot she had been carrying for 7 years. "Come on," Vincent said. "Let's get you inside. Sophia needs to see that you're all right." They walked into the club together, leaving the rain behind. Inside, the warmth hit them immediately. The old men who had been playing cards had left. The club was nearly empty now, except for family. Upstairs in Vincent's private office, Sophia sat on a leather couch that dwarfed her small frame. She wore dry clothes that someone had found, a t-shirt that hung to her knees, socks that bunched around her ankles. The Don's suit jacket was still draped over her shoulders like a cape. Frankie sat in a chair nearby, his massive frame incongruous with the gentleness in his eyes as he watched the child. When the door opened and Elena entered, Sophia's face transformed. "Mama!" She launched herself off the couch and ran to her mother, who dropped to her knees and caught her daughter in an embrace that seemed like it might never end. Both of them were crying now, holding each other as if the world might try to tear them apart again. Vincent stood in the doorway watching. Frankie approached him quietly. "The kid was brave," the underboss said in a low voice. "Didn't cry after you left. Drank her cocoa. Asked 100 questions about where her mama was, but didn't cry. She's got steel in her. She ran through the city at night to find help for her mother," Vincent said. "Of course she has steel." They watched Elena and Sophia for another moment. Then Vincent gestured to Frankie, and they stepped out into the hallway, leaving mother and daughter alone. "What are you going to do?" Frankie asked. "About Salvatore or about Elena?" "Both." Vincent was quiet for a long moment. "Salvatore dies. That's not a question. He can't be allowed to think he can operate in territories adjacent to ours without consequences. And he definitely can't be allowed to think he can touch people under my protection." "Is Elena under your protection?" "She left, Vincent. 7 years ago. She walked away. And now she's back." "Is she? Or are you just—" Frankie stopped himself. "Say it! Are you just seeing what you want to see? A second chance at something that was never going to work?" Vincent turned to look at his underboss, his oldest friend, the one man who could speak to him this directly. "I'm seeing a woman who tried to build a life outside this world and couldn't because the world doesn't work that way. I'm seeing a woman who was beaten by loan sharks in front of her daughter because she fell behind on payments. I'm seeing someone who needs protection whether she wants it or not. And the kid? What about Sophia?" That question hung in the air between them. Vincent looked back through the window in the door at the small girl who was still clinging to her mother. "The kid deserves to grow up safe," Vincent said finally. "She deserves to never have to run through the streets at night begging strange men for help. She deserves to eat every day and sleep without fear and believe that monsters aren't real. That's not our world, boss. That's not who we are." "Maybe it should be," Vincent said, and something in his voice made Frankie look at him sharply. They were interrupted by Johnny Books, who appeared at the end of the hallway. "Doctor, Moretti is 10 minutes out. Maria says the rooms are ready, and Vincent—" He hesitated. "What is it, Johnny?" "Word is already spreading. Our people saw Carlo and 12 men roll into Morton Street. They saw him come out with Elena Russo and 3 of Salvatore's men. By morning, everyone will know. The Vulture is going to hear about this before sunrise." "Good," Vincent said flatly. "I want him to hear. I want him to know exactly who he offended. Let him sweat. Let him make his plans. And then let him make his mistakes." Johnny nodded slowly. "And if he's smarter than we think? If he doesn't make a mistake?" Vincent smiled, and it was the coldest thing Frankie or Johnny had ever seen on his face. "Then I'll make one for him. But either way, by the end of this week, Salvatore Grimaldi is going to learn that there are some lines you don't cross. There are some people you don't touch. And there are some debts that can only be paid in blood." He turned and walked back into his office, where Elena and Sophia waited. Across the city, in a warehouse on Pier 17, 3 men hung by chains from support beams, their feet barely touching the concrete floor. The warehouse was cold and dark and smelled of rust and old fish. Water dripped somewhere in the darkness. Gino the Weasel was crying openly now. Rocco had soiled himself in fear. Even Hambone, the biggest and toughest of them, looked pale and sick. They knew what was coming. They had done this enough times themselves. They knew how this story ended. And somewhere else in the city, in a luxury apartment overlooking the harbor, Salvatore, the vulture Grimaldi, sat at his dinner table, eating osso buco and drinking expensive wine, completely unaware that his world was about to end. He would know soon enough. The rain continued to fall, washing the streets clean. But some stains, once made, can never be erased. The wheels had begun to turn. The debt had come due. And Vincent Caruso, the phantom, the Don who had loved a woman enough to let her go, was about to remind the entire city why you did not threaten what was his. Not ever, not even once. Dawn broke over the city in shades of gray and gold, the rain finally stopping as the sun struggled through heavy clouds. In Vincent Caruso's private residence, a 3-story townhouse in an exclusive neighborhood far from the club, Elena Russo woke in a bed softer than any she had slept in for 7 years. For a moment, she forgot where she was. Then memory returned in a flood. The collectors, Sophia's desperate flight, Carlo's rescue, Vincent's face in the rain. She sat up quickly, wincing at the pain in her ribs, and looked around the guest room. It was beautiful. Hardwood floors, cream-colored walls, furniture that looked antique and expensive. French doors opened onto a small balcony overlooking a private garden. This was a world she had left behind, a world she had convinced herself Sophia was better off without. She found a robe laid out at the foot of the bed, silk, emerald green, and wrapped herself in it. Her clothes from last night were gone, replaced by new ones hanging in the closet. Dresses, slacks, blouses, all in her size. Someone had been very efficient. Elena opened the bedroom door and stepped into a hallway lined with paintings. She could hear voices below, Sophia's high, excited chatter, and a deeper male voice responding with surprising patience. She descended a curved staircase to find herself in a dining room that took her breath away. A long mahogany table could seat 12. Crystal chandeliers caught the morning light, and at the head of the table sat Vincent, already dressed in a dark suit, reading a newspaper while Sophia sat beside him eating pancakes and talking non-stop. And then Frankie said there's a garden out back with a fountain and maybe fish. Do you think there's fish? I like fish. Not to eat, I mean. Well, I like to eat fish too, but I mean like pet fish. Do you have pet fish? Vincent lowered his newspaper and looked at the little girl with an expression that might have been amusement. I don't have pet fish, but there are goldfish in the fountain. Really? Can I see them? After breakfast. Sophia took another enormous bite of pancake, then noticed her mother standing in the doorway. Mama, look, they made pancakes with chocolate chips. Elena walked into the room, suddenly self-conscious in the borrowed robe. Vincent stood immediately, the old manners ingrained so deeply they were automatic. Elena, please, sit. Maria made enough food for an army. As if summoned by her name, an older woman in a simple dress appeared from what must be the kitchen, carrying a plate of eggs and toast. She had kind eyes and gray hair pulled back in a bun. Mrs. Russo, Maria said warmly, you must be starving. Sit, sit. Coffee or tea? Coffee, please, Elena said, taking a seat across from Vincent. Thank you. Maria bustled away, leaving the 3 of them in a silence that felt too heavy for the morning light. Sophia, oblivious, continued demolishing her breakfast. Vincent folded his newspaper and set it aside. In the daylight, Elena could see more clearly the changes 7 years had carved into his face. New lines around his eyes, a hardness that hadn't been there before. But when he looked at Sophia, something in that hardness softened, just slightly. How are you feeling? He asked Elena. Sore, but better. The doctor was very thorough last night. Moretti is the best. He confirmed no broken ribs, just deep bruising. You should rest for a few days. Vincent, Elena stopped, glanced at Sophia, then back to him. We need to talk. About what happens now. We will, but not right now. His eyes flicked meaningfully to Sophia, who was watching them with the intense curiosity of children who sense adult secrets. Elena nodded. They finished breakfast in relative quiet, Sophia filling the silence with questions about the house, the garden, whether there were any toys, if she could maybe have a kitten. Vincent answered each question with patience Elena found surprising. The man she remembered had been intense, driven, always thinking 3 moves ahead. This version seemed somehow more present, more careful. After breakfast, Maria took Sophia to the garden to see the goldfish, leaving Vincent and Elena alone in the dining room. The silence stretched between them. 7 years of unspoken words creating a wall neither seemed willing to breach first. Finally, Vincent spoke. "You don't have to be afraid of me." Elena looked at him sharply. "I'm not afraid of you. Then why did you leave?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Elena's hands twisted in her lap. "You know why. Tell me anyway." "I want to hear you say it." She took a breath. "I was pregnant, Vincent. Pregnant with your child. And every day, I watched you go out that door not knowing if you'd come back. I watched men come to you with blood on their suits. I heard the stories about what happened to families, to wives, to children when things went wrong. And I couldn't," her voice broke. "I couldn't bring a baby into that world. I couldn't raise Sophia wondering if today would be the day someone used her to get to you. So you ran." "I ran," she confirmed. "I took what little money I had saved and I disappeared. I changed my name. Well, I used my maiden name. I found that apartment in Morton Street. I got a job at a diner. And I kept my head down and I raised my daughter in peace." "In poverty," Vincent corrected quietly. "In safety." "Is that what you call last night? Safety?" The words hit like a slap. Elena's eyes flashed with anger. "I tried, Vincent. I did everything I could. But the diner closed, and I had to take a job that paid less. And then Sophia got sick and the hospital bills—" She stopped, fighting tears. "I borrowed money from the wrong people because I didn't have a choice. I thought I could pay it back. I thought—" "You thought you could handle it alone," Vincent finished. "Because asking me for help would mean admitting that maybe you were wrong, that maybe running away didn't actually make you safer." "Don't," Elena said, her voice hard now. "Don't you dare sit there in your beautiful house with your servants and your men and judge me for trying to build a life where my daughter wouldn't have to see violence every single day." Vincent was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice had lost its edge. "I'm not judging you, Elena. I'm stating a fact. You left me to protect Sophia from my world, and my world found you anyway. The only difference is that last night, when it did, you didn't have anyone to protect you from it." "I had Sophia," Elena said. "She ran to you. She saved us both. A 6-year-old child shouldn't have had to run through the city at night begging for help. She should never have been in that position." "You're right." Elena's voice was thick with emotion. "You're absolutely right. And I hate that it came to this. I hate that I failed her. I hate that I had to come back to you, to this life, because I couldn't make it work on my own." Vincent reached across the table and took her hand. The gesture was so unexpected that Elena froze. His hand was warm, strong, and she remembered this, the way his touch could make her feel both safe and terrified at the same time. "You didn't fail," he said quietly. "You survived 7 years in one of the hardest neighborhoods in this city. You raised a smart, brave, beautiful little girl. You worked yourself to the bone to keep her fed and clothed and safe. That's not failure, Elena. That's heroic." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "Then why does it feel like I lost? Because the game was rigged from the start. You were never going to win playing by rules that don't exist. This city, hell, this world, doesn't let people like you just live in peace. There's always a Salvatore, always someone who sees vulnerability and exploits it. And when you don't have power, you become prey." He squeezed her hand gently. "But you're not prey anymore. You're under my protection now. Both of you. And I promise you, Elena, what happened last night will never happen again." She wanted to believe him. God, how she wanted to believe him. But the fear that had driven her away 7 years ago was still there, lurking in her chest like a living thing. "Vincent, Salvatore is going to retaliate. You took his men. You invaded his territory. He's going to die," Vincent said simply. "Soon. and then his territory becomes mine, and every other small-time operator in this city learns what happens when they touch something that belongs to me. So that's what I am now? Something that belongs to you? Vincent's eyes met hers, dark and intense. That's what you've always been, Elena. Even when you left, even when you were hiding in Morton Street pretending to be someone else, you were always mine. I just didn't push because I thought maybe you were right. Maybe you were better off without me. And now? Now I know better. Now I know that the only way to keep you safe is to keep you close. The words should have terrified her, should have sent her running again. But instead, Elena felt something inside her settle, like a compass finally finding true north. Before she could respond, the doorbell rang. Maria appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron, but Vincent held up a hand. I'll get it. He rose and walked to the front door. Through the dining room window, Elena could see a black car parked at the curb. Vincent opened the door to reveal Johnny Books, the consigliere, looking grim. They spoke in low voices that Elena couldn't quite hear, but she saw Vincent's face harden, saw his jaw clench. After a moment, he nodded and Johnny left. Vincent stood in the doorway for a long moment, staring at nothing before returning to the dining room. What is it? Elena asked. Salvatore knows. He's called a meeting with the other independent operators for tonight. He's trying to build a coalition, convince them that I'm overreaching, that if they don't stand together, I'll pick them off one by one. Is he right? Vincent smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. Oh, absolutely. But they're too stupid to realize that standing together won't save them either. It'll just make them easier to wipe out all at once. Vincent, please, don't start a war over this. He turned to her, and his eyes were cold again. The warmth from moments ago vanished like morning mist. The war started when Salvatore's men put their hands on you. I'm just going to finish it. Across the city, in a dingy office above a pawn shop, Salvatore Grimaldi paced like a caged animal. He was a lean man in his 50s with a sharp face and sharper eyes. His nickname, the Vulture, came not just from his scavenging business model, but from the way he circled weakness, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Right now, though, he was the one who felt vulnerable. Tell me again, he snapped at the man standing before him. This was Leo, one of his lower-level collectors, the one who had come to him at dawn with impossible news. Boss, I'm telling you exactly what I heard. Hambone, Rocco, and Gino went to collect from Elena Russo last night. They were there for maybe 15 minutes when Carlo Benedetti and 12 of Caruso's men showed up. They took the woman and all 3 of our guys. Just loaded them in cars and drove off. Salvatore slammed his fist on the desk. Carlo Benedetti, Vincent Caruso's top capo. What the hell is the Phantom doing getting involved with a nobody like Elena Russo? I don't know, boss. But there's more. They took the guys to that warehouse on Pier 17, the one Caruso uses for... Leo swallowed hard. For special business. Salvatore went very still. Everyone in the underworld knew what happened at that warehouse. It was where Vincent Caruso sent people who needed to learn lessons. People who came out of that warehouse, if they came out at all, were changed, broken. Have you heard from Hambone, Rocco, Gino? No, boss. Nothing. Salvatore's mind raced. Elena Russo. Why did that name sound familiar? And then it hit him like a freight train. 7 years ago, there had been rumors. Vincent Caruso, cold and untouchable, had been seeing someone. A civilian woman, which was unusual for men at his level. They usually married within the families, political alliances sealed with wedding vows. And then she had vanished, and Vincent had gone even colder, even more ruthless. There had been whispers that his heart had been broken, that he had loved her and lost her. Could Elena Russo be that woman? If so, Salvatore had just made the biggest mistake of his life. Leo, he said slowly, gather everyone. Every collector, every enforcer, everyone who works for me. I want them all here in 2 hours. Everyone, boss? That's like 40 guys. Did I stutter? Get them here and send word to Martinez, Calabresi, and Donnelly. Tell them I need to meet with them tonight. Tell them it's urgent. Tell them Vincent Caruso is making a move, and if we don't stand together, we're all finished. Leo nodded and hurried out. Salvatore sank into his chair and stared at the wall. He had been in this business for 30 years. He had survived turf wars, police investigations, rival attempts on his life. He had survived by being smart, by knowing when to fight and when to fold, by never biting off more than he could chew. But now he had bitten Vincent Caruso, the Phantom, the man who controlled half the city's underworld and had ambitions for the other half. Salvatore reached for his phone and dialed a number he had hoped never to use. It rang 3 times before a gravelly voice answered. "This better be important, Salvatore." "It is. I need your help." There was a long pause. "What kind of help?" "The kind that involves Vincent Caruso." Another pause, longer this time. "You touched something of his." It wasn't a question. Salvatore's hand tightened on the phone. "I didn't know. It was just a collection job. Some woman who owed money." "What woman?" "Elena Russo." The sound on the other end might have been a laugh or a curse. "Oh, Salvatore, you poor stupid bastard. You know her?" "I know of her. She's the one that got away. The only woman Vincent Caruso ever loved. And you sent your goons to beat her up in front of her kid?" The voice sounded almost admiring in its horror. "That's not a mistake, Salvatore. That's suicide, which is why I need your help. I can pay. Whatever you want. There isn't enough money in this city to make me stand between Vincent Caruso and someone who hurt that woman. You're on your own." The line went dead. Salvatore sat in his office as the morning light grew stronger outside, and for the first time in 30 years, he felt real fear. Not the healthy fear that kept you sharp, but the cold, creeping terror of a man who has looked into the abyss and seen something looking back. That evening, at the warehouse on Pier 17, Vincent Caruso arrived in a black car with tinted windows. Frankie drove. Johnny Books sat in the passenger seat. They parked beside the warehouse and entered through a side door. Inside, the 3 collectors hung where Carlo's men had left them. They had been there for nearly 24 hours now, given no food, no water, no reprieve. Their wrists were raw from the chain. Their shoulders screamed with pain from supporting their weight. All 3 were barely conscious. Vincent walked slowly across the concrete floor, his footsteps echoing in the vast space. He stopped in front of Gino the Weasel and looked at him with the clinical detachment of a scientist examining a specimen. "Do you know who I am?" Vincent asked softly. Gino's head lifted slowly. His eyes were red-rimmed and filled with terror. He nodded. "Say my name." "Vincent Caruso." The words came out as a croak. "And do you know why you're here?" "The woman, Elena Russo." "We didn't know, Mr. Caruso. I swear to God we didn't know she was yours. Salvatore just said collect the debt, that's all. We were just doing our jobs." Vincent nodded slowly, as if this explanation made perfect sense. Then he turned to Frankie. "Break his hands." "No!" Gino screamed. "Please, no, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, please!" Frankie moved with brutal efficiency. He produced a hammer from his coat and swung it once, twice, 3 times. The sounds of breaking bones mixed with Gino's scream. When it was done, both of the man's hands were ruined, fingers bent at impossible angles, bones visible through torn skin. Vincent waited until the screaming subsided to broken sobs. Then he moved to Hambone. The big man was still trying to maintain some defiance, but his eyes gave him away. "You hit her," Vincent said quietly. "Multiple times. You made her bleed in front of her daughter. She owed money," Hambone said, his voice rough but steady. "That's the business. You know that, Caruso. You've done worse." "I have," Vincent agreed. "Much worse. But never to someone who was trying to leave this life behind. Never to someone who just wanted to be left alone." He leaned in close. "And never, ever to someone I loved." Understanding and terror flooded Hambone's face. Vincent stepped back and nodded to Frankie. Frankie didn't use the hammer this time. He simply punched Hambone in the ribs with the full force of his considerable strength. Once, twice, 3 times. The sound of ribs cracking was like dry wood snapping. Hambone's scream was agonized, inhuman. Finally, Vincent turned to Rocco, the youngest of the 3, the one who had mostly just watched while the others did the violence. He was weeping openly now, his face streaked with tears and snot. "Please," Rocco whispered. "Please, Mr. Caruso. I didn't touch her. I swear, I just stood there. I didn't even want to be there. Please." Vincent studied him for a long moment. "You stood there," he said quietly. "You watched while your partners beat a defenseless woman. You did nothing to stop it. You think that makes you innocent? I was following orders. Salvatore's orders. What was I supposed to do? You were supposed to be a man, Vincent said. You were supposed to say no. You were supposed to walk away. You were supposed to have a line you wouldn't cross, even on someone else's orders. He turned away from Rocco and walked back toward the door where Johnny Books waited. Over his shoulder, he said, Frankie, the young one lives. Get him cleaned up and put him back on the street. Make sure everyone sees him. Make sure everyone knows what happened here and why. And the other two? Frankie asked. Vincent paused in the doorway. Without turning around, he said, They don't matter anymore. Do what you want with them. Just make sure Salvatore gets the message. He walked out into the evening air, leaving behind the screams that were already beginning again. By midnight, word had spread through the underworld like wildfire. Vincent Caruso's men had brutalized 2 of Salvatore's collectors and released the 3rd as a walking warning. The message was clear. Elena Russo was under the Phantom's protection, and anyone who had touched her would pay. In his office, Salvatore received the news with a face like stone. Around him sat 3 other independent operators. Martinez, who ran gambling operations, Calabrese, who controlled the docks, and Donnelly, who trafficked in stolen goods. So, Salvatore said quietly, now we know where we stand. Vincent Caruso has declared war on me, and if I fall, you're next. One by one, he'll come for each of you until he controls everything. Or, Calabrese said slowly, we could give you to him. Make peace. Explain it was a misunderstanding. Salvatore's eyes went cold. If you think sacrificing me will save you, you're more naive than I thought. This isn't about me anymore. This is about power, territory, control. Caruso wants it all, and he's using me as the excuse to take it. Then what do you propose? Martinez asked. We hit him first, Salvatore said. Before he's ready, before he expects it. We pool our resources, our men, and we take the fight to him. That's insane, Donnelly said flatly. Vincent Caruso has 100 soldiers. We'd be lucky to field 40 between all of us. And his men are trained, professional. Ours are street thugs and opportunists. Then we hit him where he's vulnerable, Salvatore insisted. We hit his businesses, his clubs, his... He stopped. A terrible idea was forming in his mind. An idea so dangerous, so potentially catastrophic, that even thinking it felt like stepping off a cliff. What? Calabrese asked. What are you thinking? Salvatore looked at each of them in turn. We hit the woman, Elena Russo. We take her and the kid. We use them as leverage. Force Caruso to back off, or they die. The room went silent. The 3 other men looked at Salvatore like he had lost his mind. That's not leverage, Martinez said quietly. That's a death sentence. You take something Vincent Caruso loves, he won't negotiate. He'll burn this entire city down to get it back, and he'll make us all watch while he does it. But Salvatore was beyond reason now, beyond wisdom. He was a cornered animal, and cornered animals don't think clearly. They just lash out. Then we kill them, he said. Quickly, quietly. Make it look like an accident. Caruso can't retaliate if he doesn't know who did it. He'll know, Johnny Donnelly said, standing up. And I want no part of this. You're on your own, Salvatore. You made your bed with this stupidity. Now lie in it. He walked out. Martinez and Calabrese exchanged glances, then followed. Salvatore sat alone in his office, his empire crumbling around him, and made the worst decision of his life. He reached for his phone and made a call. The man who answered had no name anyone knew. He was simply called the Pole because he had once strangled a police informant with a metal pole. He was a hitman, a ghost, the man you called when you needed someone to disappear permanently. I have a job, Salvatore said. Top priority, time sensitive. I'm listening. A woman and a child, staying at Vincent Caruso's private residence. I need them gone. Tonight, if possible. There was a long silence. Then, you know what you're asking? I know what I'm paying. 500,000. Half now, half when it's done. Another silence. Then, wire the deposit to the usual account. I'll need details on the house, security, layout. I'll get them to you within the hour. And you understand, once I start, there's no calling it off, no changing your mind. I understand. The line went dead. Salvatore sat back in his chair and poured himself a drink with shaking hands. He had just set something in motion that could not be stopped. And somewhere in the back of his mind, a small voice whispered that he had made a terrible mistake. But it was too late now. The wheels were turning. The die was cast. And in a townhouse across the city, Elena Russo tucked her daughter into bed, kissed her forehead, and whispered that everything was going to be all right. She had no idea how wrong she was. The night was about to get much, much darker. The Pole was not his real name, but names were fluid things in his profession. He had been born Maxim Volkov in a frozen corner of Eastern Europe that no longer existed on any map. He had learned to kill in wars that had no names, in conflicts the world preferred to forget. By the time he was 25, he had 43 confirmed kills. By 30, he had stopped counting. Now, at 42, he was one of the most expensive contract killers in the Western Hemisphere. He did not work often. He did not need to. But when he did work, the job was always completed, always clean, always professional. He had killed politicians, gangsters, businessmen, witnesses, and once, memorably, a Supreme Court justice who had made enemies in very high places. He had never killed a woman and child before, but money was money, and Maxim Volkov had stopped believing in moral lines 2 decades ago. The townhouse was impressive. 3 stories, brick facade, wrought iron fence, security cameras at every corner. The Pole had studied the layout Salvatore's people had provided. Floor plans obtained from city records, surveillance photos taken over the past 6 hours. He knew where every entrance was, where every window opened, where the electrical panel sat. More importantly, he knew that Vincent Caruso kept only minimal security at his private residence. The Don believed in separation between business and home. He had 2 men stationed in a car across the street watching the front. Standard protocol, not expecting trouble. They would never see him coming. The Pole moved through the garden at 2 in the morning, dressed entirely in black, his face covered by a balaclava. He carried a suppressed pistol and a knife. The garden was beautiful even in darkness. Manicured hedges, the fountain Sophia had been so excited about, stone pathways winding between flower beds. He avoided the paths, moving through the shadows like water, making no sound. The fence had been easy to scale. The cameras had blind spots if you knew where to look. He reached the back door and examined the lock with a pen light clutched between his teeth. Standard deadbolt. No additional security. Caruso was either arrogant or foolish. The Pole had the lock picked in 45 seconds. The door opened silently on well-oiled hinges. He slipped inside, closing it behind him with the gentlest click. He was in a mud room that connected to the kitchen. Marble floors, expensive appliances, everything spotless. The house was silent, except for the soft hum of the refrigerator. According to the floor plans, the guest rooms were on the 2nd floor, east wing. That was where the woman and child would be sleeping. The Pole moved through the kitchen into a hallway, then to the stairs. He placed each foot with precision, testing the wood before committing his weight, ensuring no creaks would betray his presence. The 2nd floor hallway was dark, lit only by ambient light from the street filtering through curtains. 4 doors, 2 on each side. The Pole moved to the first door on the right and pressed his ear against it. Silence. He tried the handle slowly, locked from the inside. That made sense. Caruso would have told them to lock their doors. Basic security. The Pole pulled out his picks again and began working on the lock. This one was newer, more complex, but still nothing he could not handle. The lock clicked open. The Pole eased the door open an inch, 2 inches. He could see a bed, a small form beneath blankets. The child. He would do her first. Quick, painless, a single bullet to the head while she slept. Then the mother in the next room. The whole thing would take less than 90 seconds. He pushed the door wider and stepped inside, raising his pistol. The bed was empty. Not just empty. The blankets were arranged to look like a body, but there was nothing beneath them. A pillow, strategically placed. An old trick. The Pole spun around, already knowing he had made a mistake, already reaching for his knife. Vincent Caruso stood in the doorway, backlit by the hallway light. He wore dress pants and a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up. No gun visible, but his hands were loose at his sides, ready. His face was completely calm, showing no surprise, no fear. just cold calculation. "Good evening," Vincent said softly. "I've been expecting you." The Pole did not hesitate. He was a professional. He raised his pistol and fired. The suppressed weapon made a sound like a harsh cough. The bullet hit nothing but air. Vincent had already moved, faster than a man his size should be able to, sliding to the left with the fluid grace of someone who had trained for violence his entire life. The Pole fired again, adjusting his aim, but Vincent was inside his guard now, one hand clamping on the Pole's wrist, the other driving a knife-hand strike into his throat. The hitman gagged, his grip on the pistol loosening. Vincent twisted the wrist savagely, and the gun clattered to the floor. The Pole brought his knee up toward Vincent's groin, a brutal move that had dropped larger men. Vincent turned his hip, taking the impact on his thigh, and drove his forehead into the Pole's nose. Cartilage crunched. Blood exploded across both of their faces. They grappled in the darkness, two predators locked in combat. The Pole was trained in Sistema, the brutal Russian martial art that emphasized efficiency and ending fights quickly. Vincent had grown up fighting in the streets before learning from family enforcers who had been killing people for decades. Both were dangerous. Both were committed. The Pole managed to get his knife free and slashed at Vincent's face. The Don jerked back, but not quite fast enough. The blade opened a line across his cheek, blood immediately welling. The Pole pressed his advantage, driving forward, slashing again. Vincent caught the knife hand at the wrist and twisted, using the Pole's own momentum to send him stumbling. Before the hitman could recover, Vincent was on him, driving him face first into the wall with bone-crushing force. The Pole's forehead hit the plaster and he saw stars. Vincent's arm snaked around his throat from behind, locking into a perfect rear-naked choke. The Pole thrashed, trying to break free, but Vincent's grip was iron. The hitman reached back, trying to gouge eyes, but Vincent kept his head tucked, applying steady pressure to the carotid arteries. The Pole felt his vision narrowing, felt consciousness slipping away. In a last, desperate move, he drove his elbow backward into Vincent's ribs. Once, twice, 3 times. He felt something give. Vincent grunted but did not release the choke. The world was going gray. The Pole's movements became weaker, more uncoordinated. He tried to speak, to beg for mercy, but no sound came out, and then he was unconscious. Vincent held the choke for another 10 seconds, making sure, then released the man and let him slump to the floor. He stood slowly, breathing hard, one hand pressed to his ribs where the Pole's elbow strikes had done damage. Cracked rib, possibly 2. He had felt that sensation before. The hallway light came on fully. Frankie appeared, gun drawn, followed by Carlo and 4 other soldiers who had been stationed throughout the house. Elena stood behind them, her face pale, one hand pressed to her mouth. "Check him," Vincent said quietly, nodding to the unconscious hitman. Carlo knelt and quickly searched the Pole, finding another knife, a garrote wire, and a small vial of something that was probably poison. "He's clean now, boss." "Professional. Not many people carry this kind of kit." "Where's Sophia?" Vincent asked Elena. "Downstairs with Maria, hidden in the safe room like you told us." Vincent nodded. Earlier that evening, after Johnny Books had informed him about Salvatore's meeting with the other operators, Vincent had made a decision. If Salvatore was desperate enough to try to build a coalition, he was desperate enough to do something stupid, something like sending a hitman. So Vincent had moved Elena and Sophia to rooms on the ground floor, had set up the second-floor rooms as a trap, and had waited. He had known someone was coming. He had just not known when. The Pole groaned and began to stir. Vincent gestured to Frankie and Carlo. "Get him to the basement. Tie him to the chair. Don't be gentle." They hauled the hitman to his feet and dragged him out. Vincent walked to the bathroom, looked at himself in the mirror. The cut on his cheek was not deep, but it was bleeding freely. He would need stitches. He ran water over his hands, washing away the Pole's blood and his own. Elena appeared in the doorway. "You're hurt. I've been hurt worse." "Vincent, you could have been killed." He turned to look at her, and something in his expression made her breath catch. "I told you I would keep you safe. Did you think those were just words?" She stopped, not knowing what to say. "Go back to Sophia. Stay in the safe room until I come for you. This isn't over yet." "What are you going to do?" Vincent's face was grim. "I'm going to have a conversation with our guest. and then I'm going to finish this." He walked past her and descended to the basement. It was finished space, comfortable with a bar and a pool table. But there was also a small room in the back, windowless and soundproofed, that served a very different purpose. The Pole sat in a metal chair, his wrists zip-tied behind him, his ankles secured to the chair legs. Blood still streamed from his broken nose. His eyes were alert now, aware, calculating his options and finding none. Vincent pulled up another chair and sat facing him. For a long moment, neither man spoke. Around them, Frankie, Carlo, and Johnny Books stood like statues, waiting. "I'm going to ask you questions," Vincent said quietly, "and you're going to answer them. If you lie, I'll know. If you refuse to speak, I'll make you wish you had. Do you understand?" The Pole said nothing. Vincent nodded to Frankie, who stepped forward and casually broke the Pole's left pinky finger with a pair of pliers. The hitman's scream was muffled by the soundproofing, but still terrible to hear. "Do you understand?" Vincent asked again. "Yes," the Pole gasped. "Yes, I understand." "Good. Who hired you?" "Salvatore Grimaldi. To kill Elena Russo and her daughter?" "Yes." Vincent's jaw tightened, but his voice remained calm. "How much did he pay you?" $500,000, half up front. "And you took the job. A woman and a 6-year-old child." The Pole's eyes met Vincent's. There was no remorse in them, no shame, just professional assessment. "It was just a job. Just a job," Vincent repeated softly. He stood up and walked to a workbench against the wall. On it lay various tools: hammers, screwdrivers, pliers, other things with more specialized purposes. He selected a pair of bolt cutters. "I'm going to tell you something," Vincent said, testing the blade of the cutters. "I've killed a lot of people in my life, more than I can count. Some of them deserved it. Some of them were just in the wrong place at the wrong time. But every single one of them, I killed for a reason, for power, for protection, for revenge, never just for money." He walked back to the Pole and held the bolt cutters where the hitman could see them. "You were going to kill a little girl who just wanted to see goldfish in a fountain. You were going to kill a woman who just wanted to live in peace. And you were going to do it for $500,000. The Pole's eyes widened as Vincent positioned the bolt cutters around his right index finger. "That makes you worse than me," Vincent said. "It makes you worse than Salvatore, because at least we have the decency to pretend we're doing this for something other than money." He squeezed the handles. The bolt cutters sheared through bone and flesh. The Pole's scream was inhuman. Vincent dropped the finger on the floor and moved to the next one. "Where is Salvatore right now?" "I don't know." The Pole gasped through his pain. "I swear to God, I don't know. He just wired the money and gave me the address. That's how it works. We don't meet." How are you supposed to confirm the job was done?" "Photo of the bodies sent to an encrypted email address." Vincent nodded slowly. He turned to Johnny Books. "Can you trace an encrypted email?" "Not in time, no, but I might have a better idea." Johnny stepped forward, pulling out his phone. "If Salvatore hired a hitman, he's not at his usual locations. He knows you'll be coming. He's hiding somewhere he thinks is safe. So how do we find him?" Johnny smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. "We ask someone who would know. Someone who's been with Salvatore for years. Someone who's scared enough to talk." "Rocco," Vincent said, understanding immediately. Rocco Minetti, the young collector who Vincent had released from the warehouse with a warning. The one who had stood by while his partners beat Elena. The one Vincent had spared specifically for this purpose. "Carlo," Vincent said. "Find Rocco. Bring him to the club. Be persuasive." Carlo grinned. "It'll be my pleasure, boss." As Carlo left, Vincent turned back to the Pole. The hitman was breathing in shallow gasps, his face gray with shock and pain. Vincent crouched down in front of him, bringing their faces level. "I want you to remember something," Vincent said softly. "I want you to remember that you came into my home to kill people I love. I want you to remember that you failed. And I want you to remember what I'm about to do to you, so that when you wake up in whatever hell is waiting, you can tell them all that Vincent Caruso is not a man you cross." He stood and looked at Frankie. "We're done here. Get rid of him." "You want it to look like an accident, boss?" Vincent thought for a moment. "No, I want it to look like exactly what it is. A warning. Dump him in the harbor. Let the cops find him." Let every hitman in the city see what happens when you take a contract on my family." Frankie nodded. He and two soldiers hauled the pole to his feet and dragged him toward the stairs. The hitman's screams faded as they disappeared into the house above. Vincent stood alone in the basement room, looking at the blood on the floor, on his hands, on his shirt. Elena had been right to run 7 years ago. This was his world, violence and blood and darkness. He was good at it, too good. It was all he had ever known. But now Elena and Sophia were back in his life, and he would burn the entire city to keep them safe. He would become the monster Elena had feared if that was what it took. He went upstairs, cleaned the wound on his cheek as best he could, changed into a fresh shirt and suit. By the time he was presentable again, word had come from Carlo. They had found Rocco. The young collector had been hiding in his cousin's apartment in Queens, jumping at every sound, knowing that someone would come for him eventually. Carlo and his men had walked in through the front door, no need for subtlety, and simply told Rocco that the Don wanted to see him. Rocco had wet himself in fear, but had come without resistance. Now he sat in Vincent's office at the club, his hands shaking, his face the color of old paper. Vincent sat behind his desk, a glass of whiskey in his hand, the cut on his cheek covered with a bandage. Johnny Book stood to his left, Frankie to his right. They looked like judges at a trial where the verdict had already been decided. "Rocco," Vincent said calmly, "do you know why you're here?" "Because—" The young man's voice cracked. He tried again. "Because of what happened with Mrs. Russo." "No. You're here because Salvatore Grimaldi hired a hitman to kill Mrs. Russo and her daughter in my home tonight. And now I need to find Salvatore so I can explain to him, in person, why that was a mistake." Rocco's eyes went wide. "A hitman? Mr. Caruso, I swear I didn't know anything about that. I swear on my mother's grave." "I believe you," Vincent said. And he did. Rocco was small-time, not important enough to be included in Salvatore's planning. "But you've worked for Salvatore for 3 years. You know his habits. You know where he goes when he's scared, so you're going to tell me. Mr. Caruso, if I tell you, if Salvatore finds out I talked, Salvatore is going to be dead before sunrise." Vincent interrupted. "The only question is whether you're going to be dead beside him. Now, I spared your life once already. I'm not going to do it again. So you're going to tell me where he is, and you're going to tell me right now." Rocco looked at the 3 men surrounding him and saw his death written in their eyes. He had one chance, one way out, and that was to give them what they wanted. "There's a storage facility," he said quickly. "In Greenpoint, industrial area. He owns it through a shell company. Uses it to store merchandise, but there's also an apartment on the 2nd floor. I've been there twice. It's reinforced. Steel doors, security cameras. He goes there when things get hot." "Address?" Rocco gave it. Vincent looked at Johnny, who nodded. "I know the place." "He's right. It's a fortress. We're going to need 20 men, maybe more. And it's going to get loud." "I don't care about loud," Vincent said. He stood up and buttoned his suit jacket. "I care about getting inside. I care about finding Salvatore. And I care about making sure every operator in this city sees what happens when you come after my family." He looked down at Rocco, who was still shaking in his chair. "You're free to go. But if I ever see you again, if I hear that you're still working in this business, if your name crosses my desk for any reason, I'll finish what I started in that warehouse. Understood?" "Yes, sir." "Thank you, sir. I'm done. I swear I'm done." Rocco practically ran out of the office. Vincent turned to his men. "Call everyone in. Every soldier, every associate who can carry a gun. I want them at the Greenpoint facility in 1 hour. Full gear. Heavy weapons if we have them. This ends tonight." Frankie and Johnny left to make the calls. Vincent stood alone in his office, looking out the window at the city lights. Somewhere out there, Salvatore was cowering in his reinforced bunker, thinking steel doors and security cameras would save him. He was wrong. Vincent Caruso was coming, and when the Phantom came for you, there was nowhere to hide. An hour later, 23 men assembled in an abandoned lot 3 blocks from the storage facility. They arrived in 8 cars, quiet, efficient, professional. These were Vincent's best. Soldiers who had been with the family for years, men who knew how to handle themselves in a fight, men who would follow the Don into hell if he asked. Carlo briefed them on the layout. Ground floor storage units. second-floor apartment, accessible by an external staircase with a steel door at the top, windows reinforced with bars. Salvatore would have at least 10 men with him, maybe more. This was going to be a war. Vincent stood before his men, his face hard in the streetlight. Salvatore Grimaldi hired a hitman to kill a woman and a child in my home tonight. He came after my family. He thought he could hide from the consequences. Tonight we're going to teach him that there is no hiding. There is no running. There is only justice. He paused, looking at each man in turn. I'm not going to lie to you. Some of you might not walk away from this. This is dangerous. This is bloody, but this is also necessary, because if we let Salvatore get away with this, every two-bit operator in the city will think they can challenge us. Every small-time boss will think they can touch what's ours, and that cannot stand. The men nodded, their faces grim but determined. Carlo takes the front with 10 men. Frankie, you take 10 and cover the back. I'm going in through the front. When you hear shooting, that's your signal. We clear the building floor by floor. Anyone who surrenders, you tie them up. Anyone who fights, you put them down. Salvatore doesn't leave that building alive. Everyone clear? A chorus of affirmations answered him. Then let's go. They moved through the streets like a military operation, spreading out, taking positions. The storage facility loomed ahead, a 3-story concrete building with dim security lights and razor wire on the fencing. It looked exactly like what it was, a fortress. But fortresses can be breached. Vincent approached the front gate with Carlo and 5 men. The gate was locked with a heavy chain. One of the soldiers produced bolt cutters and made short work of it. They slipped inside, moving quickly toward the external staircase that led to the second floor. Halfway up, they were spotted. A man appeared at a window, saw them, and started shouting. Gunfire erupted, not from Vincent's men but from Salvatore's, bullets punching through the window and sparking off the metal staircase. Vincent and his men returned fire. The window shattered completely. The shooter fell back, hit or taking cover. Vincent could not tell which. "Go! Go!" Vincent shouted, and they charged up the remaining stairs. The steel door at the top was locked from the inside. One of Carlo's men carried a breaching charge, a small-shaped explosive designed for exactly this purpose. He slapped it against the lock, and they all fell back. The explosion was deafening. The door blew inward, smoke and debris filling the air. Vincent went through first, his gun up, firing at movement in the smoke. Someone screamed. Someone fell. They cleared the entrance, then moved into a hallway, doors on both sides. Gunfire came from everywhere and nowhere. 2 of Carlo's men went down, one hit in the shoulder, another in the leg. They kept moving. Behind the building, Frankie and his men heard the explosion and the shooting. They breached through a ground-floor loading dock, moving up a service staircase, catching Salvatore's men in a crossfire. It was chaos. Brutal, ugly, necessary chaos. Vincent moved through the apartment like death incarnate. He fired with precision, wasting no shots, dropping anyone who pointed a gun in his direction. His men followed, professional and ruthless. This was what they had trained for. This was what they were good at. And then, at the end of the hallway, a door marked "Private." Vincent kicked it open. Inside was an office, richly furnished considering the industrial surrounding. Leather chairs, mahogany desk, paintings on the walls. And behind the desk, Salvatore Grimaldi holding a gun with shaking hands. "Stay back!" Salvatore screamed. "I'll shoot! I swear I'll shoot!" Vincent walked forward slowly, his own gun pointed at Salvatore's chest. "You sent a hitman to kill a 6-year-old girl." "I didn't have a choice. You came after me. I came after you because you beat a defenseless woman in front of her daughter. Because you terrorized someone who just wanted to be left alone. Because you crossed a line that should never be crossed. She owed money. And now you owe something too," Vincent said quietly. "You owe a debt that can only be paid one way." Salvatore pulled the trigger. Nothing happened. The gun clicked on an empty chamber. In his panic, he had forgotten to load it, or had fired all his shots already, or maybe he had just been too scared to check. Vincent shot him once in the chest. Salvatore collapsed backward into his chair, blood spreading across his expensive shirt. He looked up at Vincent with disbelief, as if he could not quite accept that this was real, that he was dying. "You should have left her alone," Vincent said softly. That's all you had to do. Just leave her alone. Salvatore tried to speak, but blood filled his mouth. His eyes went distant, unfocused, and then he was gone. Vincent stood over the body for a long moment, then turned and walked out. The shooting had stopped. The building was secure. 4 of Salvatore's men were dead. 6 were wounded and tied up. The rest had surrendered. Vincent's men had taken casualties, too. 3 wounded, none fatal. They had been lucky. Carlo appeared, his face grim. "It's done, boss. Building is ours. What do you want to do with Salvatore's men?" "Let them go," Vincent said. "After you've explained to them very carefully that Salvatore's territory now belongs to me, that any business they want to continue running needs my approval, and that if any of them ever forget what happened here tonight, there are 17 men downstairs who can remind them." Carlo nodded and went to deliver the message. Vincent walked out of the building into the early morning air. The sun was just beginning to rise, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. It was beautiful, peaceful, a perfect morning. He looked at his hands. They were covered in blood, some of it his own from the cracked ribs and the cut on his cheek, most of it belonging to other people. He had lost count years ago how many men he had killed. Tonight added at least 3 more to that total. But Elena and Sophia were safe. That was what mattered. That was the only thing that mattered. His phone rang. He answered it without looking at the screen. "Yes, it's Johnny. How did it go?" "Salvatore is dead. His organization is finished. His territory is ours." There was a pause. "And you?" "I'm fine. Coming back now." "Vincent, there's something you should know. Elena called. She's been watching the news. There are police reports about the storage facility. Shots fired, possible gang violence. They'll connect you to this eventually." "I don't care. Let them try to prove it." "That's not what I mean. I mean, Elena heard the reports and she knows you did this for her. She knows what it cost. And she's—" Johnny paused. "She wants to see you." Vincent closed his eyes. "I'll be there in 30 minutes. He ended the call and climbed into the car where Frankie waited. They drove back to the townhouse in silence. When they arrived, the sun was fully up, the city awakening to a new day. A day where Salvatore Grimaldi no longer existed. A day where Vincent Caruso's power had grown even larger. Inside the townhouse, Maria was making breakfast. Sophia was drawing at the kitchen table, humming to herself, innocent and unaware of the violence that had been committed to keep her safe. Elena stood in the doorway of the kitchen, and when she saw Vincent, her face crumpled. She ran to him and threw her arms around him, not caring about the blood on his clothes, not caring about anything except that he was alive. "I heard," she whispered against his chest. "I heard what happened, what you did. I told you I would keep you safe. You almost died doing it, but I didn't." She pulled back and looked up at him, tears streaming down her face. "This is what I was afraid of. This is why I left, because loving you means this. It means violence and blood and war. It means never knowing if you're coming home." Vincent cupped her face in his hands. "I know, and if you want to leave again, I won't stop you. I'll make sure you're protected, that Sophia is protected, but I won't force you to stay in this world if you don't want to." Elena closed her eyes. 7 years ago, she had run because she was afraid. Afraid of the violence, afraid of the danger, afraid of losing Vincent to his own darkness. But last night had taught her something. The violence had found her anyway. The danger had come to her door. And when it did, Vincent had been there. He had protected her. He had protected Sophia. He had proven that his love was not just words, but action. Not just promises, but commitment. She opened her eyes and looked at him. "I'm not running again. Elena, I'm not running," she said firmly, "because I finally understand. You didn't create this violence. It was already there. It's always been there. The only difference is that now I have someone strong enough to stand between me and it. Someone who will burn the world down to keep me safe. And maybe that makes me a coward, or maybe it makes me a realist. But either way, I'm not leaving you again." Vincent pulled her close and kissed her forehead. "Then stay, both of you. Make this house a home. Give Sophia a life where she can see goldfish and draw pictures and believe in good things. And I'll do what I do best. I'll keep the monsters outside the door. Can you promise me that? Can you promise me she'll be safe?" Vincent looked over at Sophia, who had looked up from her drawing and was watching them with wide, curious eyes. "I promise. On my life, I promise." Elena nodded slowly. It was not a perfect solution. It was not a fairy tale ending, but it was real. And sometimes real was better than perfect. That night, as Sophia slept soundly in her new room surrounded by new toys that Maria had somehow procured, as Elena lay in the guest room trying to process everything that had happened, Vincent stood in his study staring out at the city. Word had spread fast. Salvatore Grimaldi was dead, his organization dismantled, his territory absorbed by the Caruso family. And Vincent Caruso, the Phantom, had personally led the assault that ended it all. Other operators would hear the message. Other would-be challengers would think twice. Vincent's power had grown, and with it, his legend. But the legend came with a price. It always did. He touched the bandage on his cheek where the Pole's knife had cut him. The wound would scar. He would carry it the rest of his life, a reminder of the night he had almost lost everything. But he had not lost. He had won. Elena and Sophia were safe. They were his, and he would never let them go again. Outside, the city sparkled with lights. Millions of lives being lived, most of them never knowing about the shadow world that existed beneath the surface. Most of them never knowing about men like Vincent Caruso, who ruled that shadow world with iron fists and ruthless efficiency. And that was how it should be. Let the world sleep peacefully. Let the innocent remain innocent. Vincent Caruso would stand watch in the darkness. He always had. He always would. Because some men were born to be heroes, some were born to be saints, and some were born to be phantoms in the night, protecting what they loved with violence and blood and unwavering determination. Vincent knew which one he was. He had always known. And finally, for the first time in 7 years, he was at peace with it. 3 months had passed since the night Salvatore Grimaldi died in his fortress. 3 months since Vincent Caruso had proven to the entire underworld that some lines could never be crossed without consequence. 3 months since a little girl named Sophia had run through the rain and changed everything. The city had settled into a new equilibrium. Salvatore's former territory now belonged to the Caruso family, absorbed so efficiently that most people outside the organization never even noticed the transition. The collectors still came around, but they were polite now, reasonable, willing to work out payment plans. The protection rackets continued, but the prices were fair, and the protection was real. Vincent Caruso ran his empire with the same cold efficiency he always had, but those close to him noticed subtle changes. He left the office earlier most evenings. He took Sundays off completely, something he had never done before. And when he walked through the door of his townhouse, the hardness in his face softened, replaced by something that looked almost like contentment. Elena had transformed the house. What had been a bachelor's showpiece, beautiful but sterile, was now a home. Sophia's drawings covered the refrigerator. Books and toys appeared in corners. The smell of cooking filled the air most evenings. Maria had been delighted to have someone to cook for besides the Don, and she and Elena had formed an unlikely friendship. Sophia had enrolled in a private school 3 blocks away. She wore a uniform and carried a backpack covered in stickers. She made friends easily, invited them over for playdates, talked endlessly about her teachers and her classes and the boy who pulled her hair at recess. She was, in every visible way, a normal 7-year-old girl, except that twice a week, a black car driven by Tommy Two Fingers Messina picked her up from school. And the man she called Uncle Carlo sometimes came to dinner, always polite, always bringing gifts, always careful to keep his gun concealed when Sophia was in the room. Elena had made her peace with this duality. During the day, she could almost pretend they were a normal family. She took Sophia to the park, helped with homework, attended school functions. But at night, when Vincent came home smelling of cigar smoke and expensive cologne, when the phone rang with urgent calls, when Frankie or Johnny appeared at odd hours, she was reminded of what she had chosen. She had chosen Vincent. She had chosen this life, and she was learning to live with that choice. On a Wednesday evening in January, Vincent came home to find the house unusually quiet. Maria was in the kitchen preparing dinner, but Elena and Sophia were nowhere to be seen. He found them in the study, sitting together on the leather couch, Sophia's small body tucked against her mother's side. "What's wrong?" Vincent asked immediately, reading the tension in Elena's posture. Sophia looked up at him with serious eyes. "Mama says we need to talk about something important." Vincent's jaw tightened. He sat down across from them, preparing himself for whatever this was. "All right, let's talk." Elena took a breath. "Sophia asked me today why everyone at school has two parents who live together, but she only has me. She asked where her father is." The words hung in the air like smoke. Vincent looked at Sophia, this little girl who had run through the rain to save her mother, who had crashed into his life and changed everything. He had known this conversation was coming. He had just not expected it so soon. "What did you tell her?" he asked Elena quietly. "I told her the truth, that her father is a good man who I loved very much, but that we weren't together when she was born, that he didn't know about her because I left before I could tell him." Sophia was watching Vincent with that intense, unblinking stare that children have, the one that sees through all pretense to the truth beneath. "Are you my daddy?" Vincent felt something crack inside his chest. He had killed men without hesitation. He had ordered executions, orchestrated wars, built an empire on violence and fear. But this 7-year-old girl, asking him a simple question, had broken through every defense he possessed. He looked at Elena, silently asking permission. She nodded, her eyes bright with tears. Vincent moved to the couch and knelt in front of Sophia, bringing himself to her eye level. "Yes," he said quietly, "I'm your father." Sophia studied his face for a long moment. "Why didn't you come find us before?" "Because I didn't know where you were. Your mother left before you were born, and I spent 7 years wondering where she was, if she was all right, if she ever thought about me." He glanced at Elena. "I never stopped looking. I never stopped hoping. And then one night, a brave little girl ran through the rain and brought your mother back to me." "That was me," Sophia said, and there was something like pride in her voice. "That was you," Vincent confirmed. "You saved your mother that night. And you saved me too, even though you didn't know it." Sophia considered this. "Mama says you're in a dangerous job, that sometimes bad people try to hurt you." Vincent nodded slowly, choosing his words carefully. "I work in a world that most people don't see, a world where there are rules that are different from the rules you learn in school. And yes, sometimes it's dangerous. But I'm very good at what I do, and I have people who protect me, just like I protect them. Like Uncle Carlo and Uncle Frankie. Exactly like them." Sophia was quiet for a moment, processing. Then, "If you're my daddy, does that mean you live here now? Like, all the time?" "I've always lived here, Piccola. But yes, all the time." "Good," Sophia said decisively. "I like having you here. You tell better stories than Mama does, and you let me stay up later." Despite everything, despite the weight of this moment, Vincent smiled. "Don't tell your mother that." "I won't." Sophia paused, then launched herself at Vincent, wrapping her small arms around his neck. "I'm glad you're my daddy." Vincent held her. This tiny person who was half him and half Elena, this miracle he had not known existed until 3 months ago. He felt Elena's hand on his shoulder, felt her presence beside him, and understood that this moment, this connection, was what he had been fighting for. This was what he had killed Salvatore to protect. This was what made everything else worthwhile. When Sophia finally pulled back, her expression had turned serious again. "Can I call you Daddy? Or do I have to call you Vincent? You can call me whatever you want. I'll try Daddy first. If it feels weird, I'll try something else." "That seems fair." Elena wiped tears from her eyes. "Sophia, why don't you go help Maria set the table? I need to talk to Vincent for a minute." Sophia nodded and skipped out of the room, already calling for Maria, her child's ability to process heavy emotions and move on immediately, both heartbreaking and wonderful. Once she was gone, Elena turned to Vincent. "Are you all right?" "I just found out I have a daughter," Vincent said quietly. "How am I supposed to be all right? I should have told you 7 years ago. I should have—" "No," Vincent interrupted. "You made the choice you thought was right. You were trying to protect her from my world. I understand that now. I don't like it, but I understand it." "Do you hate me for it?" Vincent pulled her to him, kissing her forehead. "I could never hate you. You gave me the greatest gift I've ever received. You gave me Sophia." Elena rested her head against his chest, listening to his heartbeat. She's so much like you. Did you see the way she looked at you when she asked if you were her father? That direct stare, like she was reading your soul. That's all you." "God help her," Vincent murmured. They stood together in the quiet study, holding each other until Maria called them for dinner. The meal was lively. Sophia talked non-stop about her day at school, about a science project on volcanoes, about the girl who had shared her cookies at lunch. Vincent listened to every word, asking questions, engaging with a patience no one in the family would have believed possible. After dinner, after Sophia was tucked into bed with one of Vincent's old storybooks, after Maria had gone home for the night, Vincent and Elena sat in the living room with glasses of wine, the house finally quiet. "Johnny came to see me today," Vincent said. "The other families are starting to ask questions about you and Sophia, about why I went to war over a woman who left me 7 years ago, about whether I'm getting soft." Elena set down her wine glass. "What did you tell him?" "I told him the truth, that I'm not getting soft, I'm getting focused, that I know now what's worth fighting for and what's just noise, that I will burn this entire city to ash before I let anyone threaten my family." "That doesn't sound like getting soft." "It's not." Vincent turned to look at her. "But it is a change. For years I've been building power for the sake of power, territory for the sake of territory. I was filling a void inside me, trying to prove something, though I'm not sure what. And then you came back, and suddenly I remembered why any of this matters. Why does it matter? Because power without purpose is just violence. Territory without something to protect is just empty space. I was a king ruling over nothing." He reached for her hand. "Now I have something worth ruling for. I have you. I have Sophia. I have a reason to make this world safer, better, more stable." Elena squeezed his hand. "You know that terrifies me, right? This idea that you're building an empire for us. The bigger you get, the more enemies you make. The more enemies you make, the more danger we're in. Or," Vincent said quietly, "the bigger I get, the more untouchable we become. The more power I consolidate, the fewer people dare to challenge me. Elena, I'm not doing this recklessly. Every move I make, every territory I take, every alliance I form, it's all calculated. It's all designed to create a world where Sophia can grow up without fear, where you can sleep at night without jumping at every sound. Can you really create that world? In this life? I don't know," Vincent admitted, "but I'm going to try. Because the alternative, letting her grow up the way I did, surrounded by constant violence and betrayal, that's not acceptable. She deserves better." They sat in silence for a while, both lost in their own thoughts. Finally, Elena spoke. "What happens when she gets older? When she starts asking more questions? When she realizes that the reason we live in this beautiful house, the reason she goes to an expensive school, the reason men call you Don, what happens when she understands what that means?" "Then we tell her the truth," Vincent said. "Age-appropriate versions of it at first, but eventually, the whole truth. That her father runs a criminal organization. That the money that pays for her life comes from sources that would horrify most people. That the men who guard her, the men she calls uncle, are killers and thieves and extortionists. We tell her all of it, and then we let her decide what kind of person she wants to be. What if she hates you for it? What if she rejects all of this?" Vincent smiled sadly. "Then I'll respect that choice. Just like I respected your choice when you left 7 years ago. I won't force her into this life. Hell, I'll do everything in my power to keep her out of it. But I won't lie to her. She deserves to know who her father really is." Elena nodded slowly. It was not the answer she had hoped for, but it was an honest one. And after 7 years of running from the truth, honesty felt like solid ground beneath her feet. The weeks passed. Winter gave way to early spring. Sophia turned 7 and had a birthday party in the garden, inviting 12 friends from school. Vincent, uncomfortable at first with the chaos of children, found himself genuinely enjoying it. He helped organize games, distributed cake, and even wore a ridiculous party hat that Sophia insisted upon. Carlo and Frankie had shown up, ostensibly as security, but really just to see the Don wearing a party hat. They never let him forget it. But beneath the surface of domestic tranquility, Vincent's empire continued to expand. He absorbed 2 more independent operations, always offering the choice: join the family or retire. Most chose to join. Those who refused were encouraged to leave the city. Those who refused that were dealt with quietly. The Caruso family now controlled 60% of the city's underworld. The remaining families watched nervously, wondering if they were next, trying to decide whether to form alliances or submit peacefully. Vincent let them wonder. Fear was a tool, and he wielded it expertly. One evening in April, Vincent received an unexpected visitor. He was in his study going over ledgers when Maria knocked on the door. "Boss, there's a man here to see you. Says his name is Father Thomas Benedetto." Vincent looked up sharply. He knew that name. Father Benedetto was a priest at St. Anthony's, the church Vincent's mother had attended before she died. The same church where Vincent had been baptized, confirmed, where he had served as an altar boy before the streets had claimed him. "Send him in." The man who entered was in his 70s, white-haired and stooped, wearing the black suit and collar of his office. But his eyes were sharp, and he looked at Vincent with an expression that was part sorrow, part disappointment, and part something that might have been hope. "Vincent," the priest said, "it's been a long time. Father Benedetto, 15 years at least. 16. The last time I saw you was at your mother's funeral." Vincent gestured to a chair. "Please sit. Can I offer you something? Coffee? Water?" "Water would be fine, thank you." Vincent poured 2 glasses and sat across from the priest. "I assume you're not here for a social call." "No, I'm not." Father Benedetto took a sip of water, gathering his thoughts. "I've been hearing stories about you, Vincent. Stories about expansion, consolidation, violence. Stories about a man who has become one of the most powerful criminals in this city. I don't discuss my business with outsiders, Father. No offense, none taken. But I'm not here to ask about your business." "I'm here to ask about your soul?" Vincent laughed, but it was not a pleasant sound. "My soul? Father, I think we both know where my soul is headed. I've made my choices. I've done things that put me beyond redemption. No one is beyond redemption, Vincent. That's the whole point. Even a man who has killed, who has ordered deaths, who has built an empire on the suffering of others? Even him," Father Benedetto said firmly. "Especially him. Because those are the souls that need saving most." Vincent was quiet for a long moment. "Why are you really here, Father?" The old priest leaned forward. "Because I baptized a little girl last week, Sophia Elena Caruso. Her mother brought her to the church and asked that I perform the baptism even though the child wasn't born in wedlock, even though her father's name was not on the original birth certificate. And when I asked Elena about the father, she told me everything." Vincent's hands tightened on his glass. "Everything? Enough. That you're her father, that you've taken them in, given them a home, that you love them both. And Elena asked me, begged me, really, to come talk to you, to remind you that you were once a boy who served at this altar, to ask you to think about what kind of example you're setting for your daughter." "I'm protecting her," Vincent said, his voice hard. "I'm making sure she grows up safe and provided for. That's what a father does. A father also teaches his child right from wrong. A father shows his child how to live with honor, with integrity, with faith." "You want me to have faith? After everything I've seen? After everything I've done?" Father Benedetto's expression softened. "I want you to remember that you're more than what you've become. I remember the boy you were, Vincent. I remember how you cared for your mother when she was sick, how you tried so hard to keep your younger brother out of trouble, how you wept at your father's grave and swore you'd be better than him. That boy died a long time ago." "Did he? Or is he just buried under years of survival and violence and pain? Because I think he's still in there, Vincent. I think he showed up the night a little girl ran to you for help. I think he's the reason you went to war to protect her." "I think he's the reason you're sitting here right now, listening to an old priest instead of having me thrown out." Vincent stood and walked to the window, looking out at the garden where Sophia played sometimes, where the fountain held goldfish that made her smile. "What do you want from me, Father?" "I want you to come to church. Bring Elena and Sophia. Let your daughter see you pray. Let her see you acknowledge something bigger than yourself. Let her see that even her powerful father bows his head before God. I can't change what I am. I can't undo what I've done. I'm not asking you to. I'm asking you to give your daughter something more than money and protection. I'm asking you to give her a moral foundation, something she can hold on to when the world gets dark." Vincent turned to face the priest. "And you think sitting in a pew once a week will give her that? I think it's a start. I think it's better than nothing. And I think deep down you know I'm right." For a long moment, neither man spoke. Then Vincent nodded slowly. "I'll think about it. That's all I ask." Father Benedetto stood, his old joints creaking. "Your mother would be proud of you, you know. Not for what you've built, but for the fact that you're trying to protect your family. That was all she ever wanted for you. To have a family. To love them. To keep them safe. She would be ashamed of how I've done it. Maybe. Or maybe she'd understand that you did the best you could with what life gave you." The priest moved toward the door, then paused. "St. Anthony's holds Mass every Sunday at 10. We'd be honored to have you." After he left, Vincent stood in his study for a long time, wrestling with thoughts he had not entertained in years: faith, redemption, the possibility that he could be more than just a criminal, more than just a monster. That Sunday, to everyone's surprise, Vincent Caruso dressed in his finest suit and took Elena and Sophia to St. Anthony's. They sat in the back pew, Sophia between them, her legs swinging because her feet did not quite touch the floor. She fidgeted through most of the service, fascinated by the stained glass windows and the smell of incense. But when Father Benedetto gave the blessing and Vincent bowed his head, Sophia watched him, and something in her young mind registered that her father, this man who everyone seemed to fear and respect, was acknowledging something greater than himself. It was not redemption, it was not transformation, but it was something. A small step in a direction Vincent had thought closed to him forever. That evening, after Sophia was asleep, Elena found Vincent in the study. "You didn't have to do that. Go to church, I mean." "I know. So why did you?" Vincent looked at her. "Because Father Benedetto was right. Sophia needs more than just protection and money. She needs to see that there are rules beyond the ones I enforce, that there's right and wrong beyond power and weakness. She needs to see me bow my head before something, or she'll grow up thinking that power is all that matters. And you don't want her to think that? No. I want her to be better than me. I want her to have choices I never had. I want her to look at the world and see possibility, not just survival." Elena crossed the room and kissed him softly. "You're a good father, Vincent Caruso. I'm trying to be. That's all any parent can do." The months continued to pass. Summer came, hot and humid. Sophia finished first grade at the top of her class. Elena enrolled in online courses, working toward a degree she had abandoned years ago. Vincent continued to run his empire, but with modifications: less violence when possible, more negotiation, more focus on legitimate business ventures that could eventually replace the criminal ones. It was not a complete transformation. Vincent Caruso was still the Phantom, still a man to be feared, but he was also a father now, and that changed everything. One evening in August, the phone rang in Vincent's study. He answered it to find Carlo on the other end, his voice tight with urgency. "Boss, we have a problem. Dominic Castellano wants a meeting tonight." Vincent felt ice settle in his stomach. Dominic Castellano was the head of the Castellano family, one of the oldest and most powerful organizations in the city. More importantly, he was Frankie's uncle, Frankie the Bull Castellano, Vincent's underboss and closest friend. "What does he want?" He didn't say, but he made it clear it wasn't a request. "He's at the old Marconi restaurant, waiting for you." Vincent glanced at the clock. 8:30. Sophia would be in bed soon. Elena was reading in the living room. His family was safe, warm, content, but the other part of his life was calling. "Tell him I'll be there in 30 minutes. He ended the call and went to find Elena. She looked up from her book when he entered, and immediately her expression changed. "What's wrong?" "I have to go out. Business. I don't know when I'll be back." Fear flickered across her face, but she pushed it down. This was the reality she had chosen. "Be careful. Always." He kissed her, then went upstairs to look in on Sophia. She was already asleep, her stuffed rabbit clutched to her chest, her face peaceful. Vincent stood in the doorway for a long moment, committing this image to memory, then turned and left. Carlo drove him to the Marconi restaurant, an old establishment in neutral territory that had served as a meeting place for family business for 40 years. Frankie was waiting outside, his face grim. "What's this about?" Vincent asked as they walked to the private room in the back. I don't know, boss, but my uncle doesn't call meetings like this unless it's serious. They entered the room to find Dominic Castellano sitting at the head of a long table. He was in his 70s, a lion grown old but no less dangerous. Three of his top capos flanked him, all men Vincent recognized, all men with decades of experience and blood on their hands. "Vincent," Dominic said, his voice gravelly. "Sit." Vincent took a seat across from him, Frankie on his right, Carlo on his left. "Don Castellano, you wanted to speak with me?" "I did. We need to discuss your recent expansion." "What about it? You've taken over 60% of the city's operations in less than 6 months. You've absorbed independent operators, small families, legitimate businesses. You're getting too big, too fast. It's making the other families nervous." "With respect, Don Castellano, I haven't touched any territory belonging to the 5 families. Everything I've taken was unaffiliated or belonged to small-time operators who couldn't control their own people, like Salvatore Grimaldi. Salvatore sent men to beat a defenseless woman in front of her child. Then he hired a hitman to kill them both. He brought that war on himself." Dominic leaned forward. "And now you've taken his territory, eliminated 2 other independent operations, and started moving into legitimate business. Construction, waste management, unions. You're building an empire, Vincent, and empires make people nervous. So what are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting you slow down. Consolidate what you have. Stop expanding. Give the rest of us room to breathe." Vincent was quiet for a moment, reading the room. The 3 capos were tense, hands near their waistbands. Frankie was rigid beside him, torn between loyalty to his boss and loyalty to his uncle. This was a test, a line being drawn. "And if I don't?" Vincent asked quietly. "Then the 5 families will have to take action. We'll form a coalition, we'll push back. And this city will go to war in a way it hasn't seen in 30 years. Over me running my business efficiently? Over you threatening the balance of power that has kept this city stable for decades." Dominic's expression softened slightly. "Vincent, I respect what you've built. I respect your strength, but you're young. You're ambitious. And ambitious men make mistakes. They overreach. They forget that this life requires balance, cooperation, mutual respect." "I haven't forgotten anything," Vincent said. "But I also haven't forgotten that balance is just another word for stagnation. This city's underworld is run by old men who are afraid of change, who would rather maintain comfortable territories than adapt to the modern world. I'm not interested in maintaining. I'm interested in thriving, even if it means war." Vincent met Dominic's eyes. "I have a 7-year-old daughter at home. I have a woman I love. I have a life outside this business now. The last thing I want is war. But I won't be told to stop growing, stop improving, stop protecting what's mine, just because it makes other people uncomfortable. Then we have a problem. Do we?" Vincent leaned forward. "Because from where I'm sitting, the 5 families haven't been able to agree on anything in a decade. You're all too busy protecting your own interests, fighting among yourselves over scraps. You couldn't form a coalition if your lives depended on it." Dominic's eyes narrowed. "You're betting your empire on that assumption. I'm betting that I'm right. And I'm also betting that at least 2 of the 5 families would rather join me than fight me. So go ahead, Don Castellano, form your coalition, declare your war. But know that when the dust settles, there won't be 5 families anymore. There will be one, mine." The room went silent. The 3 capos looked ready to draw their weapons. Frankie's face had gone pale. Then, to everyone's surprise, Dominic Castellano laughed. It was a deep, rich sound that seemed to come from his belly. "You've got balls, kid. I'll give you that. Your father would be proud. My father was a drunk who beat my mother and died penniless. I'm nothing like him." "No, you're not. You're smarter, stronger, more dangerous, which is exactly why we need to reach an understanding." "What kind of understanding?" Dominic stood slowly, his old joints protesting. He walked around the table until he stood beside Vincent. "The kind where you stop expanding for 6 months. Let things settle. Let the other families adjust to the new reality. In exchange, I'll advocate for recognizing your territory, for giving you a seat at the table when decisions are made. You'll become the 6th family, with all the rights and protections that entails." Vincent considered this. It was a reasonable offer. More than reasonable, actually. It gave him legitimacy, protection from coalition attacks, a voice in citywide decisions. All he had to give up was 6 months of expansion. But 6 months was a long time. 6 months for rivals to regroup, for alliances to form, for opportunities to vanish. 3 months, Vincent said. I stop expanding for 3 months. After that, I do what I want. And in exchange, you recognize my territory and give me that seat at the table immediately, not after some lengthy deliberation process. Dominic smiled. You really don't like waiting, do you? I've been patient my entire life. I'm done waiting. 3 months, Dominic agreed. He held out his hand. Do we have a deal? Vincent stood and shook his hand. We have a deal. As they left the restaurant, Frankie let out a breath he had been holding. Boss, that was the most terrifying negotiation I've ever witnessed. It was necessary, Vincent said. Dominic was testing me. If I'd backed down completely, he would have known I was weak. If I'd refused everything, he would have known I was reckless. I gave him what he really wanted, time to adjust, and took what I really wanted, legitimacy. And in 3 months? In 3 months, we finish what we started. But we do it as the sixth family, not as an outsider. That makes all the difference. Carlo drove them home through streets that had grown quiet. Vincent looked out the window at his city, at the territories he controlled, at the empire he had built. It was impressive. It was powerful. But when he walked through the door of his townhouse and saw Sophia's shoes by the entrance, when he heard Elena call his name from the living room, when he smelled the lingering scent of dinner and home and family, he understood what truly mattered. The empire was just a tool. The power was just a means to an end. This warmth, this connection, this love, this was the goal. He had started this journey as a man trying to fill a void. He had become the phantom, feared and respected and untouchable. But somewhere along the way, he had found something worth more than all the power in the world. He had found family, and he would protect it with everything he had until his last breath, until the world itself ended. Because that was what love meant in his world. Not flowers and poetry, not gentle words and empty promises, but action, protection, the willingness to stand between your family and every threat, every danger, every darkness. That night, as he lay in bed with Elena beside him, as he listened to the sounds of Sophia sleeping down the hall, Vincent Caruso finally understood what his mother had tried to teach him all those years ago. Real strength was not about how much fear you inspired. It was about what you were willing to protect, who you were willing to fight for, what you were willing to sacrifice to keep them safe. He had become the most powerful criminal in the city. But more importantly, he had become a father, a partner, a protector. And in the end, that was the only legacy that mattered. The Phantom had found his purpose, and the streets would never be the same. 6 years later, a 13-year-old Sophia Caruso stood at the window of her father's study, looking out at the garden where she had once been so excited about goldfish. She was taller now, her child's face giving way to the young woman she would become. She had her mother's beauty and her father's direct stare, a combination that promised trouble for anyone who underestimated her. "You wanted to see me, Papa?" she asked, using the name she had settled on years ago. Vincent looked up from his desk, where he had been reviewing reports from his various operations, all legitimate now, or at least appearing so on paper. The Caruso family had grown even larger in the past 6 years, absorbing 2 of the original 5 families through careful negotiation and strategic pressure. Vincent was now effectively the most powerful man in the city's underworld, though he had worked hard to blur the lines between criminal enterprise and legitimate business. "Sit down, Piccola. We need to talk." Sophia sat, her expression wary. She was smart enough to know when serious conversations were coming. "You're 13 now," Vincent began. "Old enough to start understanding things I've kept from you. Things about our family, about what I do, about where our money comes from." "I already know, Papa." Vincent paused. "What do you know?" "I know you're not just a businessman. I know Uncle Carlo and Uncle Frankie and the others aren't just your friends. I know that people are afraid of you for a reason. I'm not blind. And how do you feel about that?" Sophia was quiet for a long moment, choosing her words carefully. "I think you do bad things for good reasons. I think you protect people who can't protect themselves. I think you make the world safer for Mama and me, even if the way you do it isn't always legal. That's a very generous interpretation. It's the truth, isn't it? Or am I wrong? Vincent smiled despite himself. You're not wrong, but it's more complicated than that. Sophia, I want you to have choices I never had. I want you to go to college, have a career, live a life where you never have to look over your shoulder or worry about someone using you to get to me. Then why are you telling me this now? Because hiding it from you won't protect you. Pretending this world doesn't exist won't make it go away. I want you to understand what you're a part of, so you can make informed decisions about your own life. Sophia stood and walked to the window. When I was little, I used to think you were a superhero, that you fought bad guys and saved people and made everything better. And then I got older and realized it wasn't that simple, that sometimes you were the bad guy to other people, that the men you stopped were someone else's father, someone else's brother. And now? What do you think now? She turned to face him. Now I think the world isn't divided into heroes and villains. I think it's divided into people who have power and people who don't. And I think you've used your power to protect the people you love. I can't fault you for that, even if I don't always agree with how you do it. Vincent felt a surge of pride that was almost painful. This girl, his daughter, had inherited his intelligence, his ability to see through surface appearances to underlying truth. But she had also inherited something from Elena: compassion, nuance, the ability to hold contradictory truths in tension. There's something else, Vincent said. Something I need to tell you before you hear it elsewhere. Something about how your mother and I met, about why we separated, about why you didn't know me for the first 6 years of your life. And so he told her everything. The love affair, Elena's departure, the 7 years of not knowing she existed, the night she had run through the rain to save her mother. He told her about Salvatore, about the hitman, about the war he had fought to protect them both. When he finished, Sophia's eyes were wet with tears, but her voice was steady. Mama left because she was afraid for me. Yes. And you killed people to save us. Yes. I don't know how to feel about that. Neither do I sometimes. Sophia walked to her father and hugged him, something she had not done in years. Thank you for telling me the truth, for not lying or sugarcoating it, for treating me like I'm old enough to handle it. Vincent held his daughter and felt the weight of all his choices, all his violence, all his sin. But he also felt her love, her acceptance, her understanding that the world was complicated and people were flawed, and sometimes the best you could do was try to protect what mattered. I love you, Piccola, he said quietly. I love you too, Papa. Even though you scare me sometimes. I scare myself sometimes. Good. That means you're still human. That evening, the entire family gathered for dinner. Vincent, Elena, Sophia, and several of the men who had become like uncles to the girl. Carlo, Frankie, Johnny Books, Tommy, Two Fingers, Marco. They ate Maria's cooking and told stories and laughed, and for a few hours they were just people enjoying each other's company. After the guests left, after Sophia went to bed, after the house grew quiet, Vincent and Elena stood in the garden where goldfish still swam in the fountain. The night was clear, stars visible despite the city lights. She knows, Elena said, about everything. I told her. She deserved the truth. And she's all right. She's struggling with it, but she's strong. She'll be fine. Elena leaned against him. We did it, didn't we? We gave her a childhood. We kept her safe. We loved her. We did. And now she's growing up. Soon she'll leave for college, start her own life, and she'll have to decide how much of this world she wants to be part of. Vincent nodded. That's her choice to make, not ours. They stood in comfortable silence, two people who had found each other, lost each other, and found each other again. Two people who had built something beautiful out of violence and fear and desperate love. In the distance, the city sparkled with lights. Millions of lives being lived, millions of stories unfolding, and somewhere in all that chaos, Vincent Caruso had carved out a space of peace, a sanctuary where his family could exist, safe and loved. It had cost him. It had required blood and violence and compromise, but looking at the house behind him, at the warm lights in the windows, at the life he had built, Vincent knew he would do it all again, because this was what he had been fighting for all along. Even before he knew it existed. This was home. This was family. This was everything. And the little girl who had run through the rain crying for help had saved not just her mother that night, but her father too. She had saved them all from the darkness, from the loneliness, from the endless cycle of violence without purpose. She had given them something to fight for beyond power and territory. She had given them love. And in Vincent Caruso's world, that was the rarest treasure of all, the end.